Somewhere Better by I_am_LA on AO3. Episode 55. Chapter 10. Truly Alone. Shouta had walked in circles on the sidewalk along the apartment, around and around, for an hour and a half. After a woman who had been sitting outside, mowing a large expanse of yard, gave him a suspicious look for walking in circles for so long, he quickly walked back to the house. When he had left the house, his hands had been shaking, his head had been buzzing, adrenaline and anger and something making itself known in every movement, every sharp breath, every violent exhale. That something was guilt, he would later learn. Overshadowed by anger and buzzing, there was guilt in his heart, weighing heavy. Shouta had seen people wear kimonos before, saw them on TV, saw them printed on the front of the magazines at the supermarket, and even saw people walking down the street wearing them occasionally. They weren't uncommon. They weren't odd. They just were. And he hadn't ever had a reaction like that before. Not something so simple as a 6-year-old boy. His 6-year-old boy suggesting they wore kimonos at their wedding. He shouldn't have said that. Shouldn't have said that the way he said it. Should have been more gentle in his response. But he hadn't. He climbed the stairs of his apartment building, slowly making his way up rather than using the built-in, and frequently out of order, elevator. Even though their stairway was musty and dark, and all the climbing was hell on his knee. His knee was odd like that. It seemed to think that climbing onto roofs for hero work was fine, but stairs? Not so much. When he reached the apartment door, he stopped himself before opening it, because he knew that there was an argument waiting for him on the other side, and he needed the chance to gather his thoughts before that. He slid down the wall beside the door. The how and the why. He could do that. He was nothing if not logical. He could find the how and the why. It was like science class, even if he hadn't been in a science class in around 4 years. How, he had gotten upset, because of Izuku suggesting kimonos. When he raised the voice, Izuku had started crying. That was the how. That was what happened. Now for the why. There was a whole number of reasons for that. He could go for the simple, if untrue, excuse he could hide behind, so he could ignore the rest of the problem. He could say he hated kimonos and leave it at that. Hizashi would try and pry, but that was okay. He'd probably give up at some point. And Izuku would probably accept that excuse. He had no reason not to. He was a child. The idea of his guardians lying had probably never even crossed his mind before. But Shouta didn't even know if he could stand to lie. Not to Izuku. Not to someone like Izuku. He could go with the truth, get right back to the root of the problem. Inko. And wasn't it always Inko? He could tell Hizashi that it brought back bad memories, and leave it at that. No more thinking back on the topic for Shouta. No. He could hide it away in that little part of his mind he never ventured in, the little box he refused to open, refused to unlock. He could hide the real reason away, just like he'd hidden Oboro away. Just like how he had locked away the memories of his parents' funeral, of every bad thing that had happened to him that still somehow made his skin shiver thinking about it. He could hide it all away. But Izuku had managed to get this reaction out of him, had ripped that horrible memory right into the open with no mercy. And however unintentional it might be, if he hid this away, locked it into a little space he refused to touch, refused to look at, Izuku would somehow manage to smash that box into pieces and let everything flood back out. Maybe it would be better to just say it, to admit it, let the words rush out, like water gushing from a hose, steady and unending, or let them rip like glass from his throat, one by one, no matter how painful it would be for him to say. He could do that. He could. Inko's wedding had been one of the worst days of his life. He could admit that. He could tell Hizashi about the white kimono that frequented his nightmares. He could tell him about how he only realized his sister was never coming home on that day. He could tell him about everything. How a happy, normal occasion, a day that was supposed to be joyous, gave him nightmares that left him cold and shaking, clutching his head or rushing to the bathroom before he was sick all over the sheets. He could tell him that he didn't want the day he was going to get married to remind him of the day he realized he was truly alone. He could say that. He could plan it out like a script in his mind and read from it. He could let the words tear through his throat, let them rush out. He could have a difficult conversation. He could do that. Of course, he could do that. He opened the door, and every moment felt predetermined and mechanical. His hands didn't belong to him as he turned the knob. His feet weren't his own as he kicked off his shoes, walked into the house. His eyes were someone else's as he looked around the apartment, saw Izuku sleeping on the couch, with the cats using him as a pillow. Saw Hizashi sitting at the table, wedding pamphlets gone, notebook and calculator whisked away. Hizashi stood up, glanced at Izuku, and walked into their shared bedroom. Shouta followed, shut the door. Turned to Hizashi. "You can't do that!" Hizashi snapped, voice hushed once they were alone. You can't just do that." Shouta didn't say anything. He's 6 years old. He's practically a baby. He's sensitive. His feelings got hurt so easily. You have to be careful, Sho. I know you're having trouble here, but you can't just do that to him. Shouta nodded. The kid was crying for an hour after you left, Shouta. He only stopped when he fell asleep. I know you were angry or something, and I understand that, but what were you thinking? Honestly, what were you thinking? Please tell me, because it doesn't look like you were at all. And he hadn't been. He really, truly hadn't been thinking. There hadn't been any thought process, any thought of consequences. Nothing. Hizashi looked at him, really looked at him. Just talk to me. I don't want to fight. I just want to... You never talk to me. His voice was breaking. Shouta looked away, staring at his feet. He tried to calm his racing heart, took a deep breath, and he talked. It wasn't as difficult as he'd been expecting it to be. Rather than glass being ripped out of his throat, it felt more like poking at a raw injury, something that never had the chance to heal correctly. It was like picking off an old scab, reaching into the little box in his mind and dragging this memory, kicking and screaming out into the open. Like taking something previously, something wrenched off the wall, blown off the dust, and telling a story that was so old, so ingrained into his life, that it didn't feel like his own anymore. Just like his feet and hands and eyes hadn't been his own, this story didn't feel like his either. And he wasn't the one telling it. The person talking to Hizashi, the person dragging everything out into the open, talking about every nightmare and every pain, every bump and bruise, was not him. That person was a stranger. Shouta was somewhere else, somewhere far away, watching it all happen through the static of an old television screen. Everything around him was fuzzed, like he was warped in layers of thick cotton. His hands were numb, the floor under his feet was as thin as an eggshell. He wasn't looking at Hizashi, wasn't looking at the wall over Hizashi's shoulder, the place where they had moved the photos of Izuku, the ultrasound, the photo of him as a newborn, all the way up into the last photo taken by Inko, Izuku's 5th birthday. And after that, the newest one. Izuku, 6-year-old, and smiling at the camera, face noticeably bruised, and with a party hat situated on his head. The only thing that made sense, the poke through all the cotton and fuzz and munded noise, was a smile on Izuku's face, and the rapid beating of his own heart. When he finally stopped talking, when the words stopped spilling out, there were 2 new things he noticed. Tears streaming down his face, and arms pulling him in. This was a new thing he remembered from his childhood. Something he hadn't thought much before now. Inko had always been a crier. It was probably where Izuku had gotten his tendency to handle every extreme emotion with waterworks. Shouta had been a crier too, as a child, though to a much lesser degree. The only difference between him and Inko was that he was much better at hiding his tears. He didn't feel like he was hiding anything now. He was too tired to feel afraid of that fact. Izuku woke up slowly and felt dry and puffy. Akio was on his chest, smuggling near his neck. There was a dip in the couch near his head, and he craned his neck to look behind without getting up, seeing Unkisho sitting on the couch cushion. He had taken Kanaka on his lap. His eyes looked like they hurt too. There was a movie on the television. Izuku shifted, lifting his head so he could rest it on his Unki's lap. Unkisho shifted Takara to make room. Unkisho patted his head twice, like he was a cat too. And if Izuku wasn't still tired, he probably would have found that funny. They watched the movie. No words were said. So, there is 3 things I mainly want to talk about. At least I hope it's 3 things. Okay. But first, I want to talk about Shouta saying that he locks things up in this box and stores it away and doesn't think about it. That sounds like a lot of a certain coping mechanism. Now, just because I called it a coping mechanism does not mean that it's a healthy one. There's healthy coping mechanisms, unhealthy coping mechanisms, and in-between coping mechanisms. This is an in-between coping mechanism because technically speaking, your brain does this unconsciously with certain events. If you've ever had a really traumatic event in your life happen, sometimes one of 3 things will happen. You will either forget about it completely, or it'll be a really foggy memory that you can't really remember, right? Or you will remember it vividly, right? You will remember every aspect of it. Every aspect of it will just be, not every aspect, but you'll remember it vividly, or a mixture of the 2, where there's certain aspects of it that you remember vividly, right? Like you remember it, and you can't unforget it, right? It could be the emotion, it could be the aftermath, it could be a bunch of things, but you remember it vividly, while you don't remember the rest. The rest is foggy. I have the middle in between when it comes to my traumatic events. A lot of the times I either completely forget about them or it's foggy. Like, I remember a lot about this one specific traumatic event. I do not remember the specific details. Everything else is foggy. It's fogged, right? Apart from the door opening, and then everything went foggy from there. And all I remember vividly is the fear, the absolute, like, I'm not going to describe it to you guys, but I remember the feeling. It's a certain type of fear. It's a fear where it's like, oh my god, right? But at the same time, it's like, what was I expecting? Of course this was going to happen, right? Like, it was only a matter of time kind of thing, right? Same with when I had a car crash, right? I wasn't the one driving. I wasn't the one driving. I was one of the passengers. But when that happened, I do not remember. I remember before it happened, I remember sitting in the car, my stomach hurt because I ate too much. But I remember being so happy with myself, and I was texting a friend, telling them about how I finished my whole plate, and I finished all of it. And I was super excited because I'm like, dude, I finished it. I've never been able to finish a plate from that restaurant before. Like, oh my god, I did it. I'm healing. And I was super excited and super, happy. And I go down into my phone and I see that one of my favorite streamers is streaming. So I go on, I open it, and then everything becomes foggy. And then the next time I remember anything is standing at the side of the road with my, no, I remember very fog and dust entering the car and the panic when it couldn't open the door. And then I don't know how I got out. I will be honest with you, I don't know how I got out. I don't remember how that happened. Everything else became foggy, and then we're in the sidewalk. And I remember standing there, and the neighbors that were there who saw it all happen walked out, and they handed me bread, and they're like, for the shock. I'm like, I'm not shocked, I'm good. I'm good, right? Which is the definition of shock. Like, I was like, at the time I was like, I'm not shocked, I'm good, everything's good. Let me hold your hand while I say this to you, past Echo. You were in shock, alright? Like, I knew we just crashed. I was like, we crashed. But, like, nothing was going through. Because in my mind, I could not comprehend it at the moment. I did not have time to digest all of that because I needed to take care of my siblings. Because my siblings, one of them was crying. right? And I was like, okay, I need to calm this one down, and I need to make sure that the other one doesn't start sobbing or crying or anything, right? And I need to make sure that Echo Bro is okay, and I was worrying about them, and then the police arrived. I'm like, okay, now I need to translate for my parents. Like, I need to take care of the kids, I need to translate for my parents, I need to make sure everything's okay, grab bread, eat bread, because apparently bread helps with shock. And, like, the whole time, I remember the scrolling around, and then I remember when my grandma came to pick us up. I remember I was like, wait, why are we leaving? I don't understand. And then we got home, and that's when the fear hit again. That's when the fear, the whole thing just hit me, and I started sobbing, and I had a panic attack afterwards. Like, I had a whole panic attack. And because of that, ever since, I have panic attacks whenever I have to drive, right? It used to be far worse. I remember I would get into a vehicle and I would have panic attacks if I focused on the fact that I was in a vehicle moving, right? I remember I would be fidgety, and it would be the silent panic attack. So whenever I would tell my, parents afterwards, like, oh yeah, I kind of don't like being in cars, it's kind of fearful, I remember they would always be like, well, you seem fine when you're riding a car, you're good. Right? And then I remember my mom always throwing, I've been in another car crash before that was far worse than that one, and I was fine. First of all, just because your mind did not break because of it does not mean my mind wouldn't break. And it didn't break, but it was a traumatic event, and my body handled it accordingly. I remember that when it initially happened, I kind of forgot all about it. Lately is when the memories have started to resurface, because my mind is able to comprehend it again. Right? My mind is able to fully see it now that I'm outside of the danger completely, and there is no way that I will be back in that danger. According to my mind, let's be honest, I can get back into a car crash. I don't like thinking about that, but that is a possibility. And I remember the fact that I learned about this in psychology class. The fact that sometimes the brain wipes away what it needs to. It stores it away in a little box and stores it. Because at the moment, you're not ready to apprehend that. Opening that box is not good for you, right? So the way trauma works, and as I've said before, sometimes when a really big traumatic event, your brain either chooses to erase it, remember it, or an in-between. Why? Erase it because you're not ready to comprehend what happened. You're not ready to know what happened. You're not ready to know exactly what happened in the middle, right? And then the reason why it remembers it vividly, why it tries to remember it vividly, is because you need to, so that doesn't happen again. That's actually how PTS forms. It's a way the brain is trying to prevent that event from happening again, except it hurts the individual. In a way, that's a coping mechanism. A very fucked up coping mechanism, but PTSD stems from a coping mechanism, and that's what it's an extreme form of the coping mechanism, and it's no longer a coping mechanism, right? It's detrimental, right? But the mind doesn't seem to comprehend that and just keeps going and putting the person over and over through that traumatic event in events to try to prevent it later down the road from happening again, right? So that's what happened. So the thing that Shouta is saying, putting that little box away, right? That is his coping mechanism. Now, the reason why I say this coping mechanism is a little bit in between of, like, it's morally gray, because very easily this coping mechanism that is quite natural to the body can become quite detrimental. As I mentioned before, if you store it away and only pull it back up in moments, it can result in PTSD, right? I'm not saying he's gonna get PTSD, but I'm saying that's how PTSD forms, right? That moment of your brain doing that, right? But it has to happen right after, like, the traumatic event, like a month after kind of thing. So he's not gonna get PTSD. At least I don't think he has PTSD. No, he doesn't. But that storing it away is bottling up emotions, right? And it's all right to do it in the beginning, right? Because you're not emotionally capacitated to, I don't think that's the right wording, but you're not emotionally available to talk about that, right? The reason why he would always put it in the side is because it was a recent wound. He recently was truly alone. He didn't want to deal with that. But now he's not alone. He has a support system. He has people. He needed to address that when it was just him, Hizashi, and Nemuri, right? Before Izuku even came along, he was, in a way, ready to address that, but he never did. He never grabbed that box again and opened it because his mind just wanted to push it away and push it away. And what happened? He's exploding in small little bits, but he exploded in that small little bit, right? And that's what happened. Unfortunately, that's what happened. And it will continue to happen if he does not address the issue, because bottling up your emotions is not healthy for long term. Yeah, sure, it might serve a purpose in the short term when it's bottling up a really big traumatic event or a bunch of mini traumatic events that really form the person horribly. And when you feel as though, okay, now I'm ready to address these, but know that there's never going to be an absolute like if you're waiting for that moment where it's like, oh, I'm going to be, 100% good. No. The moment you're looking for is a moment away from the thing that's already happened. And sometimes you could be going through the thing and finally be able to address it. That's why bottling up your emotions is really tricky. For the most part, just don't do it. Just don't. It could become really unhealthy really quick. Really quick. Now, other thing I want to talk about is Shouta. His thing of it was not my body. It was not my feet. It was not my eyes. It was not my hands turning the knob. It was not my voice speaking. It was not me there with Hizashi. I'm far away watching through a TV screen. Derealization. Derealization. Yeah, that's what's happening. It's a type of coping mechanism. Again, very in the middle of it being healthy and not healthy. Too much of it can become detrimental to the person, right? But in the instance, let's say this is the first time Shouta has ever done this, right? Obviously, we don't know if we're 100% sure, but if this is the first time Shouta has done this, and it doesn't happen again, then it's not a horrible coping mechanism. It was something that his brain said, okay, we need to remove ourselves from this because although we are kind of ready, we're not ready, but we need to say it. Like, we need it out in the open so we could heal, but at the same time, we can't, like, we're not fully ready, right? So that's what happened, right? And as I said, it could become dangerous quite quick. Not dangerous, but unhealthy quite quickly. And it can lead to dangerous roads, right? Derealization is not a fun thing to go through, and I can't imagine the type of psychological warfare it puts people through, especially those who struggle with it on a regular basis. I was about to say daily, but I don't know if that's a daily thing, although it might be a daily thing for some people, right? But on a regular basis, it's not fun. It's not okay. I personally suffered through not derealization, but maladaptive daydreaming, where I would literally take myself out of my body and go somewhere else and leave my body there. And I did it a lot. I still kind of do it to this day. It's not as excessive as it was before, but I did it a lot. Every time something started to trigger me, I would just escape my little head and never think about it. Every time something would happen, I would just go off into my little head. I remember after the car crash and after I had that panic attack, I went into my little head and I saw a little show in my little head, and I daydreamed about different things and about different events and about different stories and about different things. Like, maladaptive daydreaming made me great at storytelling and stuff like that and coming up with stories. But it also was detrimental because I started to lose sight of time, of reality. I'm not joking. I would daydream about talking to people, and then when I talked to that person, I realized that conversation I thought we had was a daydream. It wasn't real. I never told them that. And it started to get really bad, and luckily I pulled myself out of those deep waters before I got too deep and stuff, but something as something as unconsequential as daydreaming whenever things get tough to be able to, go through with what is happening became detrimental because I would start daydreaming even when I wasn't going through a traumatic event or something horrific. I would just be in class and I start daydreaming, or I would just be hanging out with friends and I feel even the slightest hint of annoyance from someone and I would daydream, right? And I would live there and I would be there, and I had these convoluted stories in my mind that I have turned into stories that I could turn into stories. There's certain ones that are becoming stories, but it became unhealthy. Quick. something as simple as daydreaming while you're, going through a tough time can become unhealthy. Now, I'm not saying that you need to stop daydreaming or you need to stop, putting those emotions that you can't handle at the moment away, but be conscious of the fact that you need to address what's happening. You can never run away from it. It will always catch up to you. No matter what you do, it will. There's no running from pain, especially when it's pain in your mind. There's no running from that, right? It will always come back. And if you do not address it when you're supposed to, it will come back with a vengeance, all right? But I like that Shouta finally talked, right? And I love this quote-unquote argument. It wasn't really an argument, but it was a deep conversation, a very serious conversation, filled with a little bit of emotion that they needed to have. It was something that was needed, right? As Hizashi said, you never talk to me. Because yes, they talk, but they don't talk. They don't talk about what the real problem is, what the actual stem of the problem is. It's not just the kimono that reminded him of that day, right? Let's break it down. It's not just the white kimono reminding him of the fact that Inko got married that day, and that was a day he felt truly alone. It was a day he fully compartmentalized everything. That not only did his mom leave, his dad, his sister, his final straw left. Just like that. And all of that just compartmentalized and just materialized. And now kimonos are a reminder of that. A reminder of the fact that deep inside, he has a wound from that. That he feels as though people will leave him. That he feels as though maybe he's not enough. Maybe he's just too weird. Something's wrong with him, and he can never fix it. And because of that, he loses people. Thing after thing happens when he feels as though everything is going perfectly fine. Something always comes and stabs him. And he has to be prepared for it. So he can't think about everything bad that's happened because he needs to prepare for what's about to happen. He's constantly pushing the past away to focus on the future, but he's never focused on the now. He's never even looked at the past. He's too preoccupied with what's going to happen in the future that he doesn't feel what's happening now. Sorry, doing a whole psychoanalysis on Shouta there. But no, yeah. This is really interesting. It's a really good chapter that I absolutely love. It's an argument that I love. Some people might not like, it's not necessarily an argument, but it's a serious talk that they had that I love. Some people might not like the fact that, they're arguing, but it's realistic and I like it. And it's better than having miscommunication. So, just saying, we could have it way worse, guys. Miscommunication is a tag out there that, people throw out and, it lasts the whole thing and then it's like the whole time they're miscommunicating and then they get together at the end after they talk. Like, dude, if that whole time you were miscommunicating, what makes me think that your relationship is gonna motherfucking last? What about the next time there's a miscommunication? Are you guys gonna take that long too? Sorry. It's one thing to use miscommunication as a conflict that happens once for a short amount of time, right? But miscommunication that lasts the whole time, I'm sorry, you're losing me, and I'm screaming at the book, show, TV, monitor, 803 to just speed up the process. Like, stop it. Talk like adults, even if you're not adults. Talk. You're not children. What the fuck is going on? Anyways, as always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.